It's now been well over a decade since the release of Final Fantasy XIII, the game that launched the series into the HD era. Boasting the largest development team of any Final Fantasy game up until that point, Final Fantasy XIII was always an ambitious project, and that ambition paid off as it ended up as the best-selling PlayStation 3 game ever launched in Japan, selling almost double that of Resident Evil 5, its closest competitor, while also selling over 1 million copies in North America within the first 5 days of its release. And here in the UK, it still holds the record for the biggest day one launch of any Final Fantasy game ever. Final Fantasy XIII was also a landmark title in the scope of its lore and world building. It marked the beginning of both the Fabula Nova Crystallis subseries and the then unplanned Lightning Saga. But despite its success, legacy, and impact on the series, there has been little to no talk from Square Enix so far around the possibility of re-releasing an enhanced version of the game so that it can be enjoyed by the next generation of gamers. And what's curious about this is that Final Fantasy XIII is now the only main numbered title, excluding the MMOs and Final Fantasy XVI, that is yet to receive any kind of enhanced version. And this is despite the game now approaching its 15th anniversary, and virtually every other Final Fantasy game being either remastered or remade multiple times. It therefore begs the question, why hasn't it happened yet? But to even begin to try and answer that question, we need to take a step back. Being the first Final Fantasy game to harness the power of the 7th generation of consoles, Final Fantasy XIII was on a whole new level in terms of graphical presentation and animation. When these new visuals were shown off during E3 2006, they were jaw-dropping, and it led to a huge amount of anticipation being built. And that anticipation only grew, as more and more was revealed about the game, and players around the world went hands-on during trade shows or via the demo that was accessible to those who purchased the Japanese version of Advent Children Complete. They got to experience a new twist on the ATB system that incorporated elements of the series' traditional job class system while using AI to control companions and the general flow of combat. But they also got to see a whole new generation of protagonists in action. Upon release, Final Fantasy XIII was generally well received by critics, with praise given to the game's battle mechanics, visual design, and soundtrack. However, in spite of this praise, it became clear that the game wasn't quite at the standard that people had come to expect from the franchise, or indeed, games that had been overseen by Yoshinori Kitase. In the years that followed, despite the air of negativity that surrounded the game, Lightning though still came to be seen as a strong protagonist, and not just in respect to the franchise, but also video gaming as a whole. Even with hundreds of characters to choose from, Lightning frequently managed to make it into top 10 lists of all-time favourite Final Fantasy characters. And a 2013 poll even saw Lightning named as Japan's favourite female Final Fantasy character, beating out the likes of Aerith, Yuna, and Tifa. But as if to emphasise the popularity and impact, she was then selected to be a virtual model for Louis Vuitton, and it wasn't just some throwaway brand deal or something that was exclusive to Japan. Lightning was plastered across a ton of their print and out-of-home advertising globally. With Lightning continuing to be a beacon of hope for the sub-franchise, time has also helped to heal some of the initial wounds, and in recent years, Final Fantasy XIII has experienced something of a reappraisal within the community. Fans have argued that the linearity is a positive feature rather than a detraction, often drawing comparisons to earlier games that were just as linear, they just did a better job of masking it. And indeed, it was an intentional choice by Moitomo Toriyama, the director, to unmask it, so to speak, as he wanted to portray people at the mercy of a predetermined, unjust fate. He felt that by restricting players to a rigid path from which they could rarely deviate, it would allow them to share that experience, developing a deeper sense of empathy for the characters and their predicament. It was a clever but subtle example of an emergent ludonarrative in which fate felt inevitable and inescapable, both to the characters but also the players. Plus, it felt all the more breathtaking once the lush, open landscape of Grand Pulse was reached in Chapter 11. This positive retroactive sentiment, plus the release of 13.2 and Lightning Returns, has seen the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy ship over 11 million copies worldwide. This positions the trilogy as a modest commercial success, but with so much time having now passed, and with so many technological improvements now available to the development team, the entire trilogy feels ripe for some kind of modern treatment to thrust the game back in the spotlight. And this notion has only been enhanced based on recent trends. Since the launch of the PlayStation 5, we have seen a slew of remakes and remastered editions of classic PlayStation 3 games, and even some from the generation before. While already benefiting from a next-generation facelift and revitalized graphics, these remasters have often included extra features for the players, such as bundling the new versions with existing DLC, new chapters, director's cuts, or just the sheer convenience of having the entire collection packaged as a single release. Assassin's Creed, the Ezio Collection, Uncharted, Legacy of Thieves, and Mass Effect Legendary Edition serve as fantastic examples of this, but there's also the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1. The point here is that while the originals are not exactly unplayable, graphical and technical advances made since their heyday have left them looking a little tired and dated by comparison. Plus, there are the practicalities of using dated hardware when a more modern system is readily available and convenient to use. Even the most basic of remasters allows for developers to make tweaks to gameplay, add in some quality of life improvements, bug fixes, or add new trophies. And it's hard to deny that a shiny new look is often enough of an incentive for most of us to want to revisit an old favourite. Remakes and remasters have also proven to be extremely lucrative for publishers, as they're working with an already existing title and IP with a pre-existing fanbase, and they can avoid the time, labour and cost of creating a brand new game from scratch. This has been evidenced from the very beginning of the PlayStation 5's lifecycle. Take, for example, the Demon's Souls remake, which was released as a launch title and sold over 1.4 million copies in less than a year. Since then, the market for remakes and remasters has continued to expand and thrive on the platform. And it's not like this concept has been lost on Square Enix. Back in 2021, they released an upgraded remaster of Nier for the PlayStation 4 and 5, which surpassed 1 million copies sold in just under 2 months. This was more than double the estimated sales of the original game. And with Live Alive achieving a similar feat, and the HD 2D remake of Dragon Quest III, and a full 3D remake of Romancing Saga 2 planned to release later this year, it seems that remakes and remasters are still very much in Square Enix's future. In recent times, we've also had the Pixel remasters, which Square Enix claim have sold over 3 million copies, and Crisis Core Reunion. But that then brings us back to Final Fantasy XIII. Square Enix are clearly very committed to re-releasing old games, and after the relaunch of the Pixel Remaster Collection in April of 2023, we have now reached a point where every mainstream Final Fantasy title is now available for almost every single modern system, except Final Fantasy XIII. That's not to say it's completely absent from modern systems though, as although it cannot be played on the Switch or the PlayStation 4 or 5, Final Fantasy XIII did make its way into the next console generation when it was announced for Xbox Game Pass. It arrived alongside the rest of the Lightning Saga, and all 3 games were classified as being Xbox X enhanced with FPS boosts, but these enhancements appear to have been largely driven by Microsoft rather than Square Enix. And so, while this showed there was still interest in playing the 13 trilogy on modern systems, a true Final Fantasy XIII remaster remains elusive, at least for now. For a long time, Final Fantasy XII shared a similar fate. It too was divisive when it was released, but Square Enix decided to bring it back into the spotlight in 2017 via Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, as they sought to ride the wave of its ever-increasing popularity. It was no mere port either. Instead of updating the base game, Square Enix decided to deliver a complete remaster of the International Zodiac Job system, an already enhanced version of the game that was previously exclusive to Japan. Upon launch, its sales couldn't match the runaway success of the Final Fantasy X 10.2 HD remaster, but it did go on to sell over 1 million copies, a figure that has surely risen following its subsequent release on other platforms. In short, whenever Square Enix produces these remasters or pseudo-remakes, they sell well, which means the only logical assumption is that Creative Studio 1, which is now being helmed by Naoki Hamaguchi, just feels like there are better things for them to be working on, which probably isn't what fans of 13 want to hear. Square Enix has always been very precious when it comes to reworking any of their already released Final Fantasy games. One of the core tenets is that they believe original members of the staff have to be present to oversee whatever changes are being made so they are respectful to the source material. To work along with this, the Final Fantasy III remake was directed by Hiromichi Tanaka, who was the principal game designer of the original Famicom version. And the same approach was taken with the Final Fantasy IV remake, as Tanaka was replaced by Takashi Tokita. Hiroshi Hirata was placed in charge of Final Fantasy VIII Remastered, having served as a battle programmer on the original PlayStation release. One of the original pixel artists, Kazuko Shibuya, who helped shape Final Fantasy's visual style from the very beginning, was brought back for the pixel remasters, serving as the series' art director. Toshiyuki Itahana, who was the main character designer on Final Fantasy IX, has overseen each of the subsequent re-releases. Hiroyuki Kato and Takashi Katano, who served as the director and producer of the Zodiac Age respectively, were also senior figures of the original version. And Yoshinori Kitase served as producer of the 1010-2 HD remaster and was rejoined by many senior figures who worked on the original game, including Hirata, Takai, Nomura, and Nojima. Then of course, there's the XIII Remake, which has a lot of the original staff overseeing the direction of the project. Hamaguchi is then there as the voice of the quote-unquote next generation. Creative Studio One has also said that even though they want to work on further projects relating to Final Fantasy X, such as Final Fantasy X-3, they are unable to do so as the main creative talent is already tied up with the remake project. And if this is the major factor, then the answer does seem pretty straightforward, as if the lack of availability for senior staff is preventing further work on Final Fantasy X, then it will also be preventing work on Final Fantasy XIII as it relates to the exact same creative team, with Hamaguchi even included by extension as he worked on the original game. They were of course able to prioritise work on Crisis Core Reunion because they must have felt it was much more likely to see returns due to its connection with the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. Still, they are clearly aware of the demand that's been growing in recent years, even if they have not outwardly said anything about their plans. And that's what made an interaction last month all the more intriguing. On the 13th of August 2024, Square Enix's official Twitter account asked the question, "What is your hottest take or unpopular opinion on a Final Fantasy game?" One response from our good friend Alex McCullough gained a lot of attention. He said, "Before any other FF title gets a remake, Final Fantasy XIII needs a remaster." And to clarify whether this was in reference to just the core title or the entire trilogy, he followed up by commenting, "The whole trilogy." What was more interesting though was Square Enix's reply, which read, "Any reason for a remaster instead of a remake," along with a thinking face emoji. As expected, this set off a huge amount of debate around why Square Enix chose to not only respond, but also tease a potential remake, especially given all the rumours about the Final Fantasy IX remake that just won't go away. It therefore begs the question why Square Enix chose to bring this topic up themselves, seemingly unprompted, when discussions around potential Final Fantasy remakes are akin to a powder keg. Perhaps they were genuinely just looking to create some fresh buzz around the game, or maybe this was an effort to gather some fan feedback, or who knows, maybe, just maybe, Square Enix does indeed have some bigger plans for this trilogy. Only time will tell. For now though, your only options are either to continue hoping Square Enix chooses to stop sleeping on Final Fantasy XIII, play the enhanced editions on Xbox, or muddle your way through the original PC ports. But with that, this concludes the curious case of Final Fantasy XIII Remastered, at least for the time being. How many of you would be interested in picking up a remastered trilogy, or would you prefer them to do a wholesale remake like Demon's Souls, The Last of Us, or Dead Space? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, CloudClone28, The Livestream, Gregory, Juan Jaramillo, Justin Dent, and Sukun TDK were super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.